You're listening to episode 54 of Bulletproof Executive Radio with Dave Asprey. Today, I'm interviewing Pooja Lakshmin, Chief Science Officer at OneTaste. If you've heard my talk about orgasms, you can see why I've been really excited about the show, because Pooja is a biohacker focused on orgasms, which is way cool. I'm also excited because Pooja went to the same school I did. She went to the University of Pennsylvania and studied neuroscience and has been a working psychiatrist at Stanford. And she experienced something called Orgasmic Meditation, which Nicole Devine has pioneered, and started really working on it to the point that today she's at Rutgers working with Dr. Barry Komisaruk, studying the sensory map of the limbic system to identify the specific areas of the brain that are targeted by this type of orgasmic meditation. Now, how could I resist interviewing you, Pooja? Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure, so to speak. Now, what is orgasmic meditation? How is this different from the normal orgasms that people have in the bedroom?
Sure. So orgasmic meditation it's a 15-minute practice where a stroker, typically a man, strokes the upper left-hand quadrant of a woman's clitoris. And there's no goal. It's a goalless practice. So your only job as the stroker and as the strokee is to feel sensation in your body. So it's basically using orgasm as a way to train the brain and the nervous system to feel sensation.
Now, I can see how this might be really fun for a woman. I could even see how it might be a lot of fun for a man, but certainly we're not talking about sex at all here. What does it do for women specifically versus men? Like, what does the woman get out of this? We'll start there and talk about kind of what each partner gets.
Sure. Yeah, so really what it does, and I can talk about my own experience with orgasmic meditation. I started doing the practice, I guess it's been about a year and a half ago. And for me, it was like, I'm a physician, so I'd been trained, like I went through medical school. Like, it's like my cortex is huge, like the part of my brain that's always like thinking and judging, to get through medical school, to become a doctor. It's like, you have to have a really big cortex. And like, the part of your brain that actually has you connect with people, your limbic system, which is the full 1/3 of the brain that has you, it's like your intuition, right? It's the part that has you be able to read people, and it's like experiential memory, all of those things that normally, if you're someone that's like on this straight and narrow path, you don't really give much credence to it. So there's that. And then it's also, for me, it was like, I was a woman, I was a physician. I was married, actually, at the time. I got divorced, and I didn't know how to feel pleasure. I mean, I didn't actually know how to feel anything because I was thinking so much. So what orgasmic meditation did for me was actually enable me to go into my body, which was totally scary. I mean, it was terrifying. It was awful. And actually feel pleasure. I mean, feel pain, because I think the places in the brain that are activated during pleasure are actually the same places that are activated during pain. And what we see with orgasm, what we're finding at Rutgers, is that these areas in the brain are the same. So it's like you can't only feel the good. You have to feel the good and the bad. And what this practice does is it really enables women to fully be able to receive pleasure. Yeah.
You said something pretty interesting there. First, I have to tweet this. I have a really big cortex. Like that is the coolest like brag I've ever heard. So I might even have to borrow that from you sometime. Now, you also said that you didn't know how to feel. All right. I totally resonate with that, because when I was about 30, I did some personal growth thing, and like after 3 days of this going like, this is the stupidest thing ever, someone pointed out, does your stomach feel different? I'm like, yeah, there's a different feeling in there. And they're like, yeah, that's called fear. I'm like, really? Is that what that is? Like, I truly was disconnected from like the signals my body was sending me, and I've since trained myself differently. But I think the average person listening to this right now may not quite believe or understand the concept of being disconnected from your feelings like that. Like, can you go into a little bit more as to, number one, what does that really mean? And number two, why is stroking the side of the clitoris going to fix that?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it seems crazy, to any rational person, it seems completely weird. And there's a couple different components. So it's like the nervous system actually has a voluntary component and an involuntary component. So when you hear people talking about your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous systems, that's actually your involuntary. It's a visceral nervous system. So it's the nerves that are innervating like your stomach or your heart or your gut, all of these involuntary components, your genitals. And we think really that sensation, is feeling what's going on in your body. It's actually the same thing. Feeling your own internal sensation enables you to then train that part of your nervous system so then you can feel external sensation. You can feel other people as well. And that's what we mean by training limbic capacity, being able to feel what's going on in your own body and then feel what's going on with someone else. And the way that we're sort of disconnected from it is essentially you have this big part of your brain, the neocortex, that is, we call it the self-referential part of the brain. So Norman Farb's research group out of the University of Toronto has done a ton of work on mindfulness meditation. And they found that people that have a mindfulness practice actually spend more time in their limbic system, in their experiential brain, versus the narrative brain, which is your cortex. So that actually turns off when you're meditating. So like all of this constant worrying or judging or like thinking about the future, or, like the stock market or like real estate or what you're going to make for dinner, all these things, that sort of turns off. And then you're in the part of your brain and your nervous system that actually has you be able to feel fear or feel that, hey, like my finger is warm or my genitals are tingly and things like that.
So the fear and desire part of the brain you're kind of talking
exactly.
about there.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's your research is showing that those parts of the brain are either under-exercised or underdeveloped in the Western world. Is that kind of the direction you're heading?
Well, that's what I think. Because what happens is that I think in the Western world, people really, we have a lot of conditioning, and Nicole talks about this as well. We have this conditioning that from an early age, sex is bad. You don't talk about sex. You don't really, you try not to think about it, even though it's all everyone can think about, but you don't talk about it, it's bad, whatever. But it's actually a huge part of our nervous system, and it's actually something that's such a huge component. The somatosensory cortex, or the area of the brain that is connected to the genitals, is also connected to the limbic system. So when your genitals are stimulated, your limbic system gets stimulated. And when we sort of have trained ourselves not to think about these things, it's actually inhibiting our connection to other people as well.
Now, is that the same for men and women?
So it's a good question. And one of the things that we're actually looking at with this, we're actually running male orgasm studies. So this summer, we were running women. So we had women coming into the MRI, to the fMRI, having orgasms. I actually went in the scanner a couple of weeks ago with our master stroker, Ken Blackman, and had 2 orgasms in the MRI, which was...
That guy must have the best job ever, I have to say.
Yeah, it was pretty, I actually, it was interesting for me because for the first time I understood what men feel like I had so much performance anxiety. Because you have this specific task. But yeah, so now we're going to be starting studies looking at men and looking at what happens when men are stroking their genitals, looking at prostate stimulation, urethral stimulation, male orgasm. Because the thing is that people don't know. There's actually only 2 labs in the world that are studying orgasm. Our lab at Rutgers and then another lab in the Netherlands. So it's like we're just starting to learn about this, which is crazy because I mean, this is like sex. Everyone does it, but
Yeah.
but we're just starting to learn about it. And my thought and what we know so far is that men and women actually are a lot more similar than they are different in terms of the brain.
Well, if you look at like what happens in utero, the formation of the genitals and all, like they come from the same original nervous system tissue and they differentiate differently. But going back to when the nervous system is wired, you'd think there's going to be some commonality there, but that little testosterone difference, it isn't neurological necessarily, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what also happens is that men have different sort of conditioning or psychological conditioning than women do. So men are taught to experience sex in a certain way, So if you look at if a man isn't satisfied with his partner or with his sex life, typically he turns to porn, which is, generally watching someone else experience orgasm and then getting turned on by that. Whereas women, if they're not satisfied, typically they turn to vibrators or, a mechanical device. So women are actually wanting direct stimulation, whereas men are getting turned on by watching someone else in orgasm.
But isn't that usually followed by direct stimulation too? It's sort of like, are you aroused in your head or are you aroused, in your pants, I guess?
Yeah. And it's funny, one of the studies that what we found is that actually just thinking about sex or thinking about an erotic situation actually activates the same part of your brain. So it activates the genital cortex and it activates the limbic structures, which is interesting.
There was a study I came across recently looking at neurological activation when men and women looked at different types of sex. And they, very surprisingly in this study, found that women tended to get turned on by pretty much any kind of sex. Like it didn't really matter. Animals having sex, yeah, that's vaguely sexy. Guys having sex with each other, that's vaguely sexy. Women, that's vaguely sexy. A table, that's vaguely sexy. But pretty much anything that was vaguely sexy was like, okay, like there's something there. Whereas guys were much more preferential, at least when they were watching. But it could be different for thinking or hearing or other senses like that. Is that a part of what you look at or part of what you've come across in your research?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because women, I think, are taught not to think it's bad if you're aroused. Mm-hmm. So I think I actually looked at that study. So women actually are more easily aroused, but then if you ask women, they'll say no, I'm not turned on, I'm not aroused. And they sort of convert it into anger or irritation, or they don't let themselves actually feel the pleasure. Whereas men, have these different preferences, but then they'll actually say yeah, I'm aroused. So we haven't actually looked at that yet, and that's an interesting topic. Yeah,
I'm intrigued to hear kind of where that ends up. But you're also further down the path because you're looking at orgasm specifically. Now, the tantric equations that I studied when I did my N=1 experiment said that for guys anyway, that you should limit your orgasm to once a month and no more than, I think it was no more than an hour. It might have been no more than a half hour if you want to maintain your health. Like a half hour orgasm for a guy. Is that legit?
I've never seen anything like that before. But, there's actually been research that says the more frequent men ejaculate, the lower incidence of prostate cancer.
Yep.
So I don't know about this tantric thing.
Well, I can tell you, I don't have any idea how it would be possible for you to measure the length of your own orgasm beyond a little while, but I know from personal experience that 8.5 minutes was very doable. And it's actually painful. You can't ejaculate as a guy for 8.5 minutes. That wouldn't work. But physical convulsions that are pleasurable for a while aren't that pleasurable when you're done. To the point that I had to consciously stop and start breathing exercises just to quit my abs hurt sort of things. Not to get into TMI land. But I was kind of shocked that this sort of thing was possible. And I also questioned those prostate studies around cancer because I don't know if they're looking at frequency of sex versus frequency of ejaculation. And, if you don't ejaculate but you have sex, is that a different outcome? Because certainly fluids move around in there. I don't know the answer to that, but I can certainly say that my physical energy level went up a lot when I became conscious that, hey, I'm more tired for a day or two after I ejaculate versus just have really good sex.
Right. Well, what we do know, so there's a couple things. So the difference between climax versus orgasm, and one of the things that we teach with orgasmic meditation, is that there's this huge, orgasm is a huge, a broad event. So climax is just one piece of it. Climax being either ejaculation or sort of like going over this sharp cliff. Whereas you can just take that whole, just from the start of stimulation to the end of climax, there's this whole spectrum. And during climax specifically, like when you ejaculate, you have this huge release of dopamine in the brain. So the part of the brain that gets activated, the nucleus accumbens, releases dopamine. And dopamine is like pleasure, it's reward, it's, if you take a drug like cocaine or something, that releases dopamine. So, and you get this hangover, like you get this huge high and then you crash. So, that could explain why after ejaculation, you sort of get this energy dump. Versus if you're just experiencing orgasm, you're able to build that sensation and like build your capacity and sort of expand. It's more expansive. And we think that might be related to oxytocin. And that's something that we're looking at because we know that during orgasm, oxytocin is released in the brain. So that's another big piece of it.
Certainly oxytocin has a lot to do with happiness in men and women, right? Going to dopamine, though, dopamine is a neurotransmitter, kind of a stimulatory one. I've read a few theoretical pieces that say that frequent exposure to porn or even like video games, any sort of really stimulatory activity, consistently like pushes on your dopamine. And they're theorizing things like dopamine resistance. Like if you watch porn and, masturbate all the time, that literally one reason people, especially guys, get attracted to more and more bizarre porn over time is potentially dopamine resistance. And is that something that you've come across in your research or something that you think might be legit? Or is this just like ramblings that I came across while figuring out whether I should try my experiment?
No, I mean, I think that that's accurate. Dopamine is linked to addiction. So basically, when you do any sort of super pleasurable or like risky activity, you get this surge of dopamine, but your receptors become tolerant to it. So you keep needing more and more, higher and higher levels of dopamine to get the same effect, like the same feeling. So that's how addiction happens, tolerance. And then when you take it away, you get withdrawal. So really what OM does is it's actually a way to train your attention so that you can receive lighter and lighter pressure, like lighter and lighter strokes, or lighter and lighter, like you don't need as much craziness in sex, or like you don't need as much, like you don't need all the sex toys and like all the lingerie and all that stuff. It's just actually like you take it down to the bare bones, and like it feels just as, like it feels even better because you're so sensitive.
So you sort of hack your nervous system sensitivity so that the act of sex is maybe simpler, but or maybe less vigorous, you could say, but your pleasure is much higher because you've turned on your nervous system all the way.
Exactly. So you can feel so much more, so that even just like getting a text message that's like, hey, how are you? Like you feel that in your pussy, like it doesn't have to be like something dirty. Like if you're connected to that person, like you feel it and like you're already there.
Wow. So you've just got like pretty much everyone who's listening to go, all right, I want to do this, including I would say every guy, because like that's an enormous amount of power to put in a guy's hands. Like, I think that's something that guys would get out of bringing this into their relationship, is just that connection with a woman. Because, there's a reason that women fake orgasms, because guys like to know that the women had an orgasm, or just that the guys like to know that they've aroused, the women they're with. So to know that this increases that level of arousal, so a simple thing that's not even sex is, becomes sexy. I think that generally guys like more routine, sexy things throughout the day than women. I've even seen studies about that. But if it kind of equalizes the playing field there, which it sounds like it might, like that could do interesting things for a relationship. I haven't tried this, particular like defined step practice, but certainly I'm familiar with it. So is that the case? I mean, does it bring relationships closer together? Like, what does it do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it all stems from from the limbic system, from limbic connection, really, because what it does is when you stroke your partner, your nervous system becomes in tune with hers. And you find that you're able to, essentially what the limbic system is it's sort of like this under the radar connection where you don't even actually have to be in the same room. You don't even have to be touching each other, but you can feel each other. And evolutionarily, that's what humans have developed. Like we've developed this huge part of our brain to do that, and there's studies looking at like babies and mothers and how when, the baby's taken away from the mother, the heart rate changes. And then when you bring them back together, the heart rate stabilizes. And so essentially it's like you train your brain to be in tune with your partners. And then you have this direct communication that doesn't really need, it doesn't need the higher cortical function. Like you can sort of skip the cortex and just communicate between involuntary.
So you said you can feel each other when you're in different rooms. Do you know, is that like a chemical signaling, magnetic? What's the mechanism of the communication there?
So, yeah, that's a good question. I think that it's sensation based. So during OM, what happens is you go on this 15-minute journey, right? He's stroking you, you feel all these sensations, and it encodes in your brain. The limbic system encodes experiential memory. So it's memory where, if you're scuba diving and you think about it again, you can feel the water, you can see all the colors. It's something that's very experiential. Same thing with OM. It's the part of your brain that has you feel all these sensations. So then when you're communicating, you're already in that state. You've already had that connection with your partner, so you're able to just go back into it.
Wow, that's amazing. All right, is heart rate variability something you track?
So that's a great question. That's something that we actually are wanting to look at because it's linked with parasympathetic drive, vagal tone, and during orgasm we know that the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous systems are both activated, and that's rare in human physiology for both to be activated simultaneously.
The reason I ask is that I'm an advisor to the Heart Math Institute, and I've trained myself. I'm a certified coach in heart rate variability training. And I have an app, the Bulletproof HRV Sense on the iPhone that works with a polar strap. So I'm more aware of my sympathetic versus parasympathetic state than the average bear. And one of the things that let me have enough control to not have ejaculations when I didn't want to, but also when I did to have multiple minute male orgasms was, I think, relative fine-tuned control of my heart rate variability. Like I was literally using the techniques that consciously raise heart rate variability in order to control the nervous system in some way. It would be really interesting potentially to look at heart rate variability in both partners before and after, and to do a comparison between them, because there is data that shows that heart rate variability between two people or between a person who is going to ride a horse and the horse, that they will synchronize, the HRV will synchronize, but not the heart rates, the number of beats per minute. And that this is detectable even at a distance. And the theory they have is that it's magnetic, but I'm not sure it's magnetic, but we can show that this happens sometimes. We don't know why. And there's got to be a sexual connection in there too somewhere. I just don't know what it is. So please do more research on that because I want to know.
Yeah, that's great that you mentioned it. Actually, the head of our lab, Dr. Barry Kumasarik, he did his own. I don't know. I wonder if he'll be okay with me talking about this, but I'll just do it anyway. He hooked himself up to a polygraph while he did this when he was younger, when he was having sex. And during climax, he found that his heart rate matched up with his partner's during climax.
Yeah. His heart rate or his heart rate variability? Just the rate?
His heart rate.
Interesting. There's so much interesting biohacking to be done around sex here. Okay, why the left side? You guys must have quantified left versus right.
Yeah. So actually, it's interesting because the right side of the brain does more emotions. So the thought is that you're stroking the left side, and maybe the right side of the brain becomes more activated. But we actually, we're just starting to look at the mapping of the female genitals, and we're just starting to look at the clitoris versus the vagina versus the cervix. So all these things are still up for debate. But when Nicole, really kind of researched the practice, that was the side that they found had the most sensation, really. I'm actually going to turn a light on because it's really dark.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I was just going to suggest that. For audio listeners, it doesn't matter, but if you're watching this on YouTube, it's good to be able to see both of us. You must be on the East Coast. I'm in Canada. It's getting a little dark here just because I'm so far north, but not that dark.
Ooh, how's that?
Beautiful. We can watch the sunset too.
Awesome.
So yeah, thanks for making it so we can see you. So what do guys get out of this? I mean, we've talked about a little bit, like the connection with the partner, but I'm assuming sometimes they're still fully dressed. So what's the male angle on this? Because you've done it enough times, and you must have like some training or some kind of like, what's in it for you kind of sales pitch.
Well, so the man is totally dressed. So the only article of clothing that's removed is the woman's pants. The man is completely dressed. And we say, when you're OMing, you have a 15-minute practice, and then if you're gonna have sex or if you're gonna do something else, you close the container, and then you do sex afterwards. It's not OMing isn't foreplay. And in terms of what the men get out of it, I mean, they really get all of the same benefits as women. And I know it seems like that doesn't make sense. But it does. I mean, what we see is that men, when they start stroking, they actually start to feel the same sensations in their body that the women feel. So first they'll say like, oh, I felt some heat on my finger, or I felt this jolt of electricity that went up my arm. And then as their body turns on more and more, they start to experience sensation even in their genitals as well. I mean, sometimes men, when they're stroking, will feel genital orgasm at the same time. So they get that, they get that pleasure, and then they also get the ability to really feel women. So they can communicate in that same way that women do. So like we talked about in the beginning, kind of the limbic system and intuition, like we say, like women's intuition, men are able to feel that. So they don't have to kind of navigate a woman's cortex as much.
You're saying intuition around providing the woman an orgasm? Or are you talking just intuition in general?
No, just in general.
Okay.
I mean, like relationship-wise, and I think the other thing that the practice does is it connects people to their desire. So like I can say for me, before I started doing the practice, I was very much like the kind of person that just did everything I was supposed to do, Like it didn't really matter what I wanted to do, but like I had to get straight A's, and I had to go to an Ivy League school, and I had to become a doctor, and But once you start doing this practice, it's like all that goes away, and you connect to like, what do I really want to do? Like, oh, I want to study orgasm.
So and you find your mission, and you pay more attention to the subtle things in life, you're saying.
Exactly. And men find that as well, just as much as women.
So there's no question in my mind that intuition can be trained, and I've never heard of training intuition this way, but it's really intriguing because even when I work with like Bulletproof executive coaching clients, it's one of the most precious skills. You can increase intelligence with various ways. You can increase mitochondrial function, which improves your sex life and your intelligence. Like you can do these things, but intuition is one of the most precious things that the world's top investors have. And when you ask them, they're not just numbers guys. They're numbers plus gut. And this practice increases intuition in men and women.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so what I like to say actually is that, because we know that mindfulness, like meditation, trains that part of the brain. And essentially what orgasm does, so if you add orgasm to mindfulness, is it takes you into your involuntary, right? And it activates those same parts of the brain. So it's sort of like, it's kind of like meditation on speed. Because it works
nice.
So faster, like it heats up your system, because you're dealing with desire, you're dealing with sex, all these things, and it does. I mean, it trains your intuition and it trains the part of your nervous system that has you be able to respond quickly and succinctly without having to think about things.
Looking back on it, I'm just thinking that the times when I was really doing my own set of experiments for about a year about that, I think there is a meditative quality to that. Like I don't know that you can do a practice like this without entering somewhat of an altered, less thinking state. And that's very perceptive. Did you quantify intuition? Like, is there a way of saying it, measured it by 52%?
Well, I mean, we haven't really done that. And then, to be honest, when we say intuition, I mean, my thought is that means, visceral sensation or visceral capacity. So feeling your own involuntary, that's how I define intuition.
That's where intuition appears to come from. I mean, I think there's debate over that, you could say, but
yeah,
there was a guy, Mark Devine, a former Navy SEAL commander who I had on the podcast, who runs SEAL Fit, just an amazing guy. And one of the things that experienced military guys will tell you is that, when you're out in the field, if someone has you in their sights, you know it. Like, it doesn't matter if they're 100 yards away, you know it. You feel a warmth sensation, like somehow And so I asked him flat out, like, is this BS? And he just laughed and said, no, like, it's a well-known phenomenon. We don't know why, but it's there. And that's one of those really concrete examples of intuition. You don't know why you know it, but you know it, and it can save your life. So if we assume intuition is a real thing, the visceral system there, which you can measure, even if someone's eyes are on the back of your head, it changes things. I would love to see more around intuition and sex. I think there could be a huge amount of research to be done there. I guess that how do you quantify it in the first place is the really hard thing, but it might be one of the more important things you would discover out of this practice or other orgasm research.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I'm really interested in is, and one way to measure it may be looking at, because we know that if you use a certain part of the brain, it gets more blood flow. So all these areas of the brain that get activated during orgasm, they get a ton of blood flow. So does the genital somatosensory cortex get bigger as you do this practice and as you have more orgasms, and therefore do those areas of the brain, the limbic system, does it get bigger? So that's something that we're interested in looking at. Okay,
here's a badass experiment idea. You guys use fMRI, but you don't use a radioactive dye with fMRI, right?
No, we don't.
Okay, so are you getting metabolic activation with that, or you're getting more physical structure sort of things?
So you're getting, it's interesting because it measures the delta. It actually measures change in blood flow to areas of the brain.
So it's blood flow based.
Yeah.
Got it. So I did a SPECT scan a while back and found all sorts of strange things about my brain. And one of the things that really affects me and a lot of other people is increasing the amount of ketones in the brain. So I have a product that goes straight to ketones. It's called Brain Octane, believe it or not. And I don't know if you've heard of Bulletproof coffee. It's a recipe where you use coffee and some butter and all, and it's very much about fueling the brain as maximally as possible, so you can have glucose and ketones present at the same time, and neurons that can't use glucose can use ketones, and you get this like focused speed-like energy that's amazing. It's also amazing in bed because you have literally more mitochondrial activation in the brain. I am seriously wondering right now if orgasms in the presence of ketones, whether it's from nutritional intervention or from just adding, this kind of stuff to your diet or to your coffee. I'm wondering, have you looked at even like coenzyme Q10 and other mitochondrial activators as potential orgasm stimulators?
We haven't done that yet.
God, why not?
That sounds awesome.
Do you want me to send you a bottle? Like
Totally.
I'm like the master of mitochondrial hacking just because I had my own disorders there that needed fixing. Okay, after the show, I'll get your address. I'll send you some. You don't have to ever say anything in public. I personally want to know because oh my God, I'm pretty sure that there's a big relationship there and I never thought of it. So we're going to boost all of your mitochondrial function as much as possible and put you back in the machine. And then you can say if there's a difference because there has to be. All right. Anyway, I just thought of that and it's cool. Let's see here. I want to make sure we make maximum use of your time. We've got like 10 more minutes left and I have all these questions to ask. What happens in the man's brain during orgasm that's different than the woman's brain? I know you focus most of your research on women, but I also know you've got to have studied this because, you're a neuroscientist. So.
We can't ignore the men.
Yeah.
So we're actually just starting to do the male orgasm studies. We actually just got the IRB approval for it, which is great. And Barry is super excited. He was the first subject to go in the MRI, which was really funny. None of us wanted to go in that day.
I'm just imagining who got to write that IRB application and like who got to review it. And they're like, okay.
Yeah. But I mean, what we know so far is that there's actually in terms of the brain phenomenon of what's going on with the brain, there's a lot more similarities than differences. So there's not anything that we can say is here's a specific difference between men and women. But I think from what we've seen experientially with the way that men experience orgasm versus women is that men, typically it's a lot easier for men to achieve ejaculation or to achieve climax versus women. I think it's typically more difficult. I mean, I had that experience that it was super hard for me to get to climax. And only recently have I been able to finally sink into my body enough to let that happen. And I think it's because, the cortex just wants to come in and inhibit all of these different things. Because really what climax is going out of control and surrendering completely. And then I think women have a much more difficult time. But that being said, I mean, I think men also want to experience a different type of pleasure. So they want orgasm, and what they've been having is climax,
Got it. So it's really good to differentiate between those two. In the talks that I've given, it's really tough with the Western audience because those are almost exactly the same thing. And earlier in our discussion, you mentioned it briefly, but can you go into really clear detail on the difference between climax or ejaculation versus orgasm, particularly in men, so that they understand, people who are listening understand the nuances there?
Sure. So what we're saying we're basically saying orgasm is the beginning of being in the involuntary. So orgasm essentially is arousal. So it's when your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous systems are activated. You're in the involuntary, you get blood flow to your genitals, and you're fully in sensation. So that's orgasm. And then we know that there's all of these different stages of orgasm, one of them being climax. And we also know that in the brain, orgasm it's a circuit. I mean, it's a full brain event. And at each different place in orgasm, there's different parts of the brain that are activated. So climax, is ejaculation. So that's just that's the peak. So it's actually it's like a wave. And climax is one piece of it, is the peak.
So aren't you sort of just redefining sex as orgasm and then ejaculation is ejaculation? Because pretty much it starts as soon as let's go to the bedroom. All right. There's a little bit of blood flow, a little bit of arousal, and then you just kind of go up from there. Is it that simple?
I mean, what we're doing, I think, is redefining orgasm. Sex, I think, there's a different, once you start OMing, and once you start to cultivate your orgasm, the way that you have sex is very different. Just naturally, it becomes a lot slower, and you need a lot less pressure because your body is a lot more sensitive. But essentially what we're doing is redefining orgasm to make it a lot bigger, to say that the moment your body turns on, the moment your involuntary system turns on, you're feeling orgasm in your genitals.
Got it. So you actually have enhanced your sensitivity, so it starts earlier. Okay.
Yeah.
I think I see the difference there. You also talked about not being able to have an orgasm until you gave up control, right? And so part of this practice is giving up control because you're not expecting an orgasm other than just pleasure. So is that how giving up control works in this practice?
Well, so from a brain perspective, essentially what happens is the cortex comes in, and it's the part of the brain that's always sort of like thinking and judging and telling you, that your desire is wrong or bad, or that you can't have it, So that's the part that sort of shuts down your involuntary. And through OMing, that part of the brain, during orgasm, that gets turned off. During partnered orgasm, it turns off. So you're able to control it in a way. And what we know is that for women to achieve climax, you need to have that part of the brain turned off. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So there are some women who I don't want to be too crass here, but part of orgasming for them is being held down or even like tied up and things like that, where like they don't have control and it makes it easier for them to orgasm. Is that coming from that same like neurological need there? Or is that just kind of like 50 Shades of Grey weirdness?
So I don't think it's weird. I don't think anything's weird.
Yeah, trust me, I'm not going to judge anything. I'm the guy who talks about, not having orgasms for months on end. So it's cool, right?
I think that sort of goes along with, we have all these different preferences in sex, and we have this idea of what it's supposed to look like. And needing, when you're not able to go into your involuntary, you need a lot more pressure. Like you need more dopamine, essentially, to be able to achieve that climax. So then you have to do sort of more and more like risky or sort of out of the ordinary things to be able to get to that place. But I think once you start OMing, you can take, a lot of that goes away because you're able to go into the sensation a lot more quickly and feel a lot more. So you don't need a lot of that extra stuff.
Okay.
That being said, I think that all of those, everything, the great thing about and OneTaste and sort of this community is that everything is accepted and welcome, and it's sort of, you get to play with all these different things.
There's no question. Lots of people are wired to like lots of different things, and yeah, none of them are particularly better than others. So don't want to imply that. All right, here's the question that would be in my brain if I'd listened to this whole podcast so far. All right, how often should women have an orgasm for optimal performance, and how often should men?
Oh, I think every day.
Daily for both.
Yeah.
Does it vary by age?
No, I don't think so. I think people should be having an orgasm every day.
Okay.
And, yeah.
Self-administered or not?
No. So here's the other thing, and we didn't talk about this. One of the things that we're looking at is what's the difference between self-stimulation versus partnered. And it looks like actually in the brain it's different. So during partnered orgasm, the cortex turns off. And that's why OM is a partnered practice. You can't take yourself out of control. So when you're doing self-stimulation or if you're masturbating, you're actually not getting that same relief and you're not getting the limbic connection. So it needs to be partnered to get that full surrender.
So it's really funny. I interviewed the CEO of Lyft. This is an app for the iPhone where people put habits in for productivity, and it reminds you to do it every day. And the number one habit right now is floss. So people try and give themselves credit for flossing, and it just occurred to me that maybe like have sex might be a better habit than flossing. I would make that trade-off personally. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. We should get Orgasm on there.
Most definitely. I think that you need to reach out to him and do that. That's hilarious. But okay, that's cool. There's a question that I ask everyone who comes on the show, and given everything you've learned, not just in neuroscience or orgasm or anything else, what are the top 3 recommendations you have for people, given all of your life lessons, that you think they should know in terms of, performing better, being more who they are, kicking more ass, the whole 9 yards, like the most valuable 3 nuggets ever?
Oh, okay, that's good. Let's see. I would say follow your gut. Follow your desire. How about that? Follow your desire. That's number 1. Even when everyone else thinks you're crazy. Follow your desire. Number 2, I would say stay connected. Stay connected to the people in your life, even when it's difficult or even when you don't want to, because we know that connection is the way to actually improve your life and improve your nervous system and actually train yourself. And 3, I would say surrender to the things that you think that you shouldn't do or that you think are bad or dirty. I think you do them and see what you learn.
That last one sounds like Your Brain on Sex. That book. I know you must have come across it somewhere. Yeah, got it. So give it a try. I like that last one. Awesome, Pooja. It's been a real pleasure hearing about your research and hearing about OneTaste. Can you tell people where they can find out more about your research and more about OneTaste, how they could potentially go to a class or learn just how to do this stuff?
Absolutely. So our website is OneTaste, ONETASTE.US. And you can find information about classes and different offerings that we have on the website. And yeah.
Great. And if people want to support the university level research you're doing there, is there any sort of website or thing they should see, or just everything should go to OneTaste?
They can come to OneTaste, or they can go to the Rutgers website as well and look up the Rutgers Neuroscience Orgasm Laboratory. And
beautiful.
There too.
Thanks. It's been so much fun chatting about this. Keep doing the work you're doing, and I'm definitely going to send you some of that brain Octane, and you've got to tell me if it makes a difference that you can measure, because I just want to know.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Mycotoxins in the plant world they're everywhere.
Yeah,
they're absolutely
you can't get rid
everywhere.
Of them. Right.
You can try to mitigate them if as best as possible. The first thing is to try to identify them, identify the ones that can really do damage.
See the head of foam that's formed on it? This is similar to what you get with a latte. There are actually little bubbles still coming to the surface, just like a freshly steamed latte.